Hi, glad you could join me. So you want to know all about lead? Well, you came to the right place. Even way out here, I can't seem to get away from the stuff. The earliest use of lead was by the ancient Egyptians, who used it to give a shiny coating to their pottery. The Romans actually made cooking utensils from lead and designed the first plumbing system to carry drinking water. They called lead plumbus, and that's where we get the name plumber from. Today, nearly every time you turn around, you encounter lead. You could even find lead in gasoline until the federal government phased it out because it contributed to air pollution. Lead is still used in batteries, electric cables, solder, bearings for machinery, and of course, buckshot, bullets, and fishing weights.
Chemical compounds of lead are used in printer inks, dyes, explosives, insecticides, medicines, and plastics. But the biggest concern to you is the widespread use of lead paint. Just about every metal structure exposed to the elements has been primed and painted with lead-based paint. Even older wooden structures painted in the 40s and 50s are likely to have been painted with lead-based paint. You've probably heard about the hazards of lead paint to kids. When little children chew on things painted with lead paint or covered in lead dust, it can make them sick, even kill them.
Lead poisoning is a reality, and it's deadly serious. So if you work with or around lead, what I'm going to show you can not only help you live longer, it can help protect you and your family as well. Now, let's get down to business. This is an electric furnace. It heats lead to its melting point, which is 621 degrees Fahrenheit. Lead boils at 3,164 degrees Fahrenheit. When heated to its melting point, lead gives off deadly fumes. Now watch this.
After taking the lead bullets out of the mold, I sometimes have to file off the rough edges and polish them. This process releases small particles which I don't want to breathe, swallow, or even touch. I go out of my way to avoid coming in contact with the fumes or particles.
Thousands of primitive weapon shooters make their own lead bullets. But how many actually wear respiratory protection? I don't take any chances when I work with lead, and neither should you. Now let me tell you why.
Just as asbestos was the health hazard of the 80s, lead is becoming the hazard of the 90s. It is going to take more than common sense safety measures to protect you from lead's hazards.
Let me put it this way. It's common sense to wear gloves when you touch a hot surface, or to stay away from spinning saw blades. But when you're dealing with lead in its various forms on a daily basis, you need more than common sense. You need hard facts.
In your work, lead fumes are created by welding or cutting metal structures that have been painted with red lead primer. Lead dust is created when you grind or blast a surface. The greater the force used in grinding or sanding, the smaller the dust particles. Sanding the inside of a building painted with lead-based paint generates larger particles that tend to settle quickly. This is less of a risk than you have with blasting. Blasting with abrasives under high pressure really kicks up the dust, and red lead dust can be deadly stuff. Let's look at the facts. Personal exposure to dust levels in exterior blasting operations compared with interior lead abatement work are shown to be hundreds, sometimes thousands of times higher. Lead dust is like radioactive fallout. It settles on a job site. Then it can be stirred up again by sweeping and blowing with compressed air. Even though it's illegal to sweep and blow lead-laden dust on a construction site, you may still be taking home some unwanted lead on your clothing and in your body. It makes sense to wash your hands before you eat, but what happens if you're eating 20 stories up on a steel beam, or you're working at a site? No excuse when you're working around lead-based paints. Your employer will make washing stations available to you. Use them, or else you can carry deadly lead home on your skin, in your hair, under your nails, and on your clothes. Eating, drinking, or even smoking with lead-laden dust around is asking for long-term misery. You don't even have to see the fumes and the fine dust to be exposing yourself to a hazard. This guy must really like to live dangerously. He's generating lead fumes with his cutting torch, and his pack of cigarettes is open, just absorbing those fumes. When he lights up later on, he'll get more than a nicotine fix. He'll be inhaling lead. It's hard to think about something like lead poisoning when you're in a place like this. But not long ago, some parts of the Chesapeake Bay were declared off limits to fishermen because of high concentrations of lead and other pollutants in the fish and shellfish. What happens when too much lead gets into the human body? In factory workers, exposure to lead tends to be constant over a long period of time. This is called chronic exposure. Eventually, maybe after several years, the body just can't tolerate any more exposure and illness results. Around construction work, there's a real danger of short-term overexposure called acute exposure. This large dose of lead can kill you in a matter of days. In one case of lead poisoning, it took only 5 days for a worker to reach a blood lead level 3 times that of the permissible level. OSHA requires regular testing for workers who are exposed to lead. If a worker reaches the permissible blood level, he will be temporarily removed from the job site and immediately retested. Follow-up tests will be continually given on a frequent schedule. A blood lead level above the permissible level can cause many health problems, including massive brain hemorrhaging. Where you stand when it comes to lead on the job can save your life, so arm yourself with knowledge about the hazard. Lead poisoning is a real sickness. There are many symptoms which can often be mistaken for other illnesses. Headaches, for instance, can have a number of causes. Lead overdose is one. Other common symptoms of lead overexposure are loss of appetite, a metallic taste in the mouth, fatigue, anemia, irritability, constipation, muscle and joint pain, and stomach cramps. When lead builds up in the body, it disrupts the blood's ability to carry oxygen. This leads to anemia and makes you tire out easily. Anemic workers describe themselves as being tired all the time. Lead can also damage the nervous system, causing numbness, slowness, and intense irritability, and it can accumulate in the bones, producing immature blood cells. Long-term exposure can cause kidney damage, with few symptoms appearing until extensive damage has been done. And here's what I meant when I said that lead can affect your family. Lead poisoning can affect the reproductive systems of both men and women. In men, it can alter the structure of sperm, raising the risks of birth defects. So wear your respirators and clean up on the job site. Women who work in construction or have husbands in the trades should also be concerned. There is evidence of miscarriages and stillbirths in women whose husbands were exposed to lead. Women exposed directly to lead may suffer decreased fertility and abnormal menstrual cycles. And unborn babies may be affected because lead can be absorbed through the placenta. Did you ever think you might be bringing lead home to your children? Young children exposed to lead run a high risk of lead-related health problems, particularly learning disorders. Children are especially sensitive to lead. Lead can have a permanent effect on both mental and physical development. Lead can even lead to permanent disability. The big question is, how much lead is too much? Hypertension is predominant at a blood level of 10. Infertility is common in men at a blood level of 40. And there is a great risk of death at a blood level of 100. OSHA has set a national standard for general industry. The standard requires that if the level of lead in a worker's blood exceeds the permissible level, he must be removed from work and given full pay. When his blood level drops back to a safer level, he may return to the job site. A simple routine blood test called the PBB test can check the level of lead in your blood. The most important thing is that you and your employer can both take steps to make sure that lead doesn't get into your blood in the first place. A 5-step plan to approach a job with possible lead contamination can help to eliminate unnecessary exposure. Step 1. Analyze paint for lead content. Collect every layer of paint right down to bare metal. Seal it in a plastic bag or vial and send it to a reputable lab for analysis. The location of each sample must be recorded and the samples numbered. In residential paint removal, anything over 0.5% is considered leaded paint. In exterior structures, lead is usually found in much higher concentrations. Step 2. Reevaluate the project if analysis reveals red lead primer. Any debris which contains lead must be disposed of in an EPA-approved hazardous waste site. This includes the spent grit or water used in blasting and paint chips. As a result, it may be necessary to redo the contract because of higher removal costs. Step 3. The company must put a plan in writing describing each step taken to protect workers during lead removal. All workers receive training on this plan, and copies of the plan must be made available to them. Step 4. Define and separate work areas where lead exposure will be over 50 micrograms per cubic meter of air. These danger areas must be enclosed or at least separated by a physical barrier. Only workers with proper respiratory protection will be allowed into these areas. Signs must be posted to warn workers to stay out unless they have the required protection. Step 5. Eating, drinking, or smoking in or near lead hazard areas is forbidden. It puts workers' health at serious risk. A trailer a safe distance from the blasting, cutting, and lead removal site will be provided for breaks, lunch, and cleanup at the end of the day. Soap and fresh water will also be provided. A number of portable on-site water systems can be used. For example, this one effectively recovers wastewater, eliminating the dumping of lead-contaminated water. Your employer will establish restricted areas whenever any direct cutting, burning, or abrasive blasting of leaded surfaces will release lead well above the exposure limit of 50 micrograms per cubic meter. The best way to assure safety areas is to test the air itself. Workers are equipped with small personal sampling pumps which pull air through special filters. Several air samples are taken, and the average daily exposure is determined by laboratory analysis. Reducing your personal exposure to lead is easy. Use engineering controls like substitution of materials, isolation or automation, ventilation or exhaust controls, and process and equipment modifications. One simple method is to use longer torches for oxyacetylene cutting. The longer torch keeps lead fumes farther away from the worker's breathing zone. In blasting, the type of grit used can affect the amount of dust generated. Do not use crystalline silicate, since the hazards of silica are nearly as dangerous as those of lead. Engineering controls also reduce waste problems while reducing exposure to lead. For example, when using a contained blasting method, blasting grit is delivered through a nozzle placed directly against the surface to be blasted. A powerful vacuum pulls the spent grit and dust away from the surface and separates them in a hopper. The dust goes into a collector while the grit is recycled. Lead exposure can be reduced by limiting the amount of dust created when removing lead. Two dust-reducing blasting techniques are wet blasting and vacuum blasting. Larger blasting units and tight enclosures are often used for big jobs like stripping and repainting water towers. These enclosures include a large ventilation source to pull away the dust and collect it. No matter what approach is taken, respiratory protection and protective clothing are an absolute necessity. All respirators must be approved by the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH. Respirators are designed and approved for filtering dust and fumes. However, they should not be used as the only means of preventing or minimizing exposure. Respirators are most effective when used with other exposure minimizing engineering controls. Also remember that lead exposure can change drastically from day to day, even hour to hour. Select the respirator that will protect you from the highest anticipated exposure level. You need to be trained in the use, maintenance, and cleaning of respirators. Also, your employer should evaluate your ability to perform the work while wearing a respirator. Respiratory equipment puts a strain on heart and lungs. Workers must be medically sound before using it. Respirators must fit properly if they are to provide adequate protection. There are different tests for different types of respirators. Make sure adequate testing is done on your respirator while you are wearing it before exposing yourself to lead. These tests routinely show improper fit is most likely to occur whenever a worker is talking while wearing a respirator. If you're working in an area that requires wearing a respirator, keep conversation to a minimum and never chew gum or chewing tobacco. If you are working in a restricted area, you will also need to wear clothing that doesn't go home with you. Your company will provide you with special coveralls or other work clothes for this purpose. A changing area will be provided for you where you can remove contaminated items and put on your street clothes. Contaminated items need to be placed in sealed containers.
The construction industry probably deals with lead on a more intensive basis than any other trade. That's why it's so important that you become a lead expert and lead the way in dealing with lead. Take it from me, what you don't know can hurt you. So be smart when it comes to lead. Your company wants you and your family to enjoy many more days like this one.